illusion with regard to part of my life. I completely lose my self-confidence, right? I usually only live stream when I have a considerable amount of self-confidence. You can see the live streams where I don't exhibit the self-confidence, because then I'm just quite morose. And it's very easy on live streams to share all sorts of dark things that you would not share in normal face-to-face interaction. Stephen J. James, what's new with you?
Hi, Luke. How are you?
I'm good, man. What's going on?
Oh, not much, not much. I heard you talking about climate change. I do have a really unique climate change conspiracy theory. I know you love a good conspiracy theory if you want to hear it.
Beautiful, please.
Okay, so I'll put a link in the chat. The link is kind of important. It's about oil. Okay, it's in the main chat, and I'll put it in the private chat. Maybe you want to put it on the screen. I don't know, but look. So this might be a bit out there. My conspiracy theory is that about 20 years ago, some very intelligent people in the world figured out, or they noticed that, look, oil is going to run out at some point. And in, say, 1,000 years, either way, nobody doubts that we are going to not have gasoline cars, not be burning coal. It's all going to be electric either way. But we don't have 1,000 years of oil left, or anything like that. We don't have a few hundred years. We have, I think, at the current stage, it's something like 50 years, 47, something on that counter at current consumption rates. So we don't have enough time to get there. So, and even if we just leave it to market forces as they stand, we won't actually be able to work out the technology to get away from oil, get away from burning coal and everything in time before we hit this crisis point in about 50 years' time. So we have to make it happen sooner. And how do we do that? We have to engineer a sense of urgency, a sense of crisis, because it's going to take trillions of dollars worth of investment and innovation and decades of innovation in R&D technology, in batteries and in generators and all this kind of stuff and infrastructure to actually ever get us to the point where everybody has electric cars, like we're totally away from burning coal and stuff like that. And the only way to do it is to create this crisis so that there is we create an artificial market, let's say, which is basically what's happened over the last 20 years. And so, like with Tesla and electric cars now are only where they are through subsidies and through regulation, basically being enforced on people. So that's my wild conspiracy theory about why there is such an urgency. What do you think about that?
I think a lot of that is true, because usually the most effective way to get significant change is to say there's a state of emergency. And so what you just said is not just true with regard to climate change, it's true with a very common political, social tactic, because when you can make the case that there's an emergency, then all the ordinary rules start to fall away, right? If we're in an emergency, all the traditional rights that we have are vulnerable to being taken away. So during COVID, there was a state of emergency, and so freedom of movement, freedom of religion got taken away. If there's a climate change emergency, then habitual safeguards to legislation get diminished or taken away. And there's a very common political saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. And it's not just something done on the left, but the Trump administration did it too with regard to immigration. They used COVID to effectively stop immigration, both legal and illegal, into the United States. So everyone tries to use circumstances to their advantage, and claiming a state of emergency is frequently the most effective tactic.
Yeah, so that's my wild conspiracy theory. Because, for instance, we could never allow ourselves to run out of oil, no matter what. So we can never allow it to get that far, because we need it for plastics and stuff like that. So there's like 47 years worth at current consumption left. And the thing is, nobody would be driving around in electric cars and they wouldn't be where they are if it wasn't for the sense of urgency, and if it wasn't for subsidies that have got us this far already. And the truth is, the battery technology already isn't that great. It still needs basically another like 50 years of innovation at normal market rates, but maybe it'll take like 20 or 25 years with like all the urgency, all the regulation, all the subsidies, people thinking they have to make the change, because we need batteries to be at the point where it's like filling up your car with gasoline at the moment, where you go and you can plug it in and like in 5 minutes it's charged and the battery runs at least like twice as far as it does now. At the minute, we're still in like the early infancies. So anyway, I like a good conspiracy.
Well, also, I think what you're reacting against and why you're attracted to live streams is the increased level of authenticity. That you're reacting to the contrived nature of news. You're reacting to the contrived nature of public discourse. There's so much of public discourse which just seems removed from reality. It's clear that people are trying to manipulate us, and in reaction to that, I think that's what drives you, me, and a lot of other people towards things like live streams. What do you think?
I do. I think also, like Elliot Black, I see through the bullshit, Luke. Yeah. I do. I think I've started to see through it much more recently too. I did a video about this today in relation to people like Tucker Carlson. Oh my God. I saw him go on that Joe Rogan podcast and start with aliens. And I was like, what are you doing, dude? And I'm so disappointed in these people, Luke. I mean, I used to look up to Tucker Carlson. I thought that me watching Tucker Carlson was giving me like a unique insight into the world. I was seeing through the bullshit. And now I look at him and I think, well, I'm just so disappointed. I'm just so disappointed that he just comes across as an utter grifter to me now. I don't know what happened.
Well, I think I know what happened. What do you think of this theory? When you spot the contrived nature of public discourse, you move to a place that is out where the buses don't run no more. You stop being as dependent on social cues because you recognize that many of the things that are taken for granted in polite discourse are false. So you start suspecting that more and more of public discourse is false. So you move outside of polite society, and then the only people who tell you that you're a brave truth teller and you're doing a great job are people on the fringe of society, and you start becoming more and more vulnerable to audience capture. And to maintain your position as a brave truth teller, you have to keep giving people things that they can't get in normal discourse, in the normal cycle of news, or in normal commentary for elites. So you become irresistibly driven towards conspiracy theories because it's the only way you can keep giving your audience something new and exciting.
Yeah, and then after a while you become enamored, I guess too enamored with your new brave truth tellers. But then you start to, get used to them, and then you start to see through them, and it just becomes, I don't know. I started to see through so many different things. I even suspect it's might be down to the fact that there's that meme that the prefrontal cortex only really develops around the age of 25, and that maybe it just kicked in for me, a few years ago or something. I don't know what the answer is, but I've become super disappointed with all the people that I used to look up to. Really, I'm only sticking around with the Luke Ford show, basically, Luke. I've kind of given up on most of the other things from back in the day.
Yeah, I think we've gone on a similar trajectory. I was pretty full of myself being a brave dissident truth teller between, say, 2014 up to 2020. But once I broke from doing a daily show with Kevin Michael Grace, where I was overwhelmed by his brilliance and his charisma and his commanding personality. Very smart, talented man. And once I went out on my own and we had the emergence of COVID, I read a book on the Spanish flu in 1918, 1919, and how devastating it was. And I saw that an influenza epidemic could, kill millions of people if we didn't implement extraordinary emergency measures. And it made sense to me that this new epidemic might very possibly be as severe as the Spanish flu. And so while unfortunately I was not pushing or supporting the public health measures of social distancing, I was not opposed to them either. And so that immediately split me from almost all the right-wing talkers that I'd previously felt simpatico with, from Dennis Prager to Tucker Carlson. So for me, COVID was a key turning point in rejecting a lot of partisan right-wing discourse. What were the key turning points for you?
I think for me it was a little later, and it was the Ukraine war. I remember this very specifically, because in the run-up to the Russia invading the Ukraine, I basically swallowed the entire idea that Putin was on our side, that he was this trad guy that was fighting against the American Satan, the liberal world order, and that he was something else, that he was the leader of this alternative. And somehow I bought this hook, line and sinker, like many people still do to this day on the distant right. You see it, there's so much pro-Russian sentiment, it's off the charts. But in particular, what I'd done is I did a few live streams. Barely anybody watched them back then. Barely anybody watched me still now, but even less back then. And I was listening to Vladimir Putin explain to everybody in the weeks leading up to it that he absolutely had no intention of invading anybody. And our leaders, do you remember this time where our leaders, particularly Kamala Harris, flew over there and they were saying to us, Russia is about to invade? And I was absolutely certain that our leaders were lying to us, because they lie to us all the time. So I did this live stream where I was watching Vladimir Putin's speech and saying how sensible he was, what an absolute statesman he was, how he was the sensible guy in the room. Our leaders are obviously lying, making it up, saying it's not, that they're just, I forget exactly, but basically then Russia invaded. Vladimir Putin had been saying that it was just a training exercise. And I swallowed this hook, line and sinker. And then after it, I realised, well, I was wrong about that. Our leaders actually were telling the truth in that instance. So what else have I been wrong about? Actually questioning them. And what about all these other people who had been drip feeding me this slow Russian propaganda over the years? All the people who go on Russia Today, all the various talking heads of the dissident right basically have a side gig. I've had a side gig on Russia Today or Press TV, haven't they? And I realised, well, it's just being slow drip anti-Western propaganda. Some of it mixed with truth, but some of it not. So I had this real period of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Colin Liddell, he seems to have stood up pretty well over the years. What do you think?
Yes, that's why I have gravitated towards Colin Liddell a little. He's, pardon my French, he's fucking harsh on some of these.
Yeah.
On some of the dissident right. He's absolutely brutal. And he was probably earlier than you and I in seeing through the bullshit of the dissident right, even.
Yeah.
To some extent, that most people think he's definitely some kind of MI5 Mossad asset or something. But I really do have a feeling, I appreciate where he's coming from, how he became so disillusioned with that scene so early on. Really, so I guess it comes to us all eventually.
You've had it sounds like a lot of intellectual realizations recently. Are there other ones that you can share?
No, that's probably the best of it, Luke. And I probably have to run. I probably
Okay.
given my best takes there. I've noticed in the chat I have a hater though, Luke here. Curious Gazelle. I think there's some sexual tension between Curious Gazelle and Ice because she's being mean to me. So you'll have to question her about that when she comes on next.
Right, right. Wait, one more question. How have you
go ahead.
dealt with the temptation to overshare morbid thoughts? So people who talk live and spontaneously, they tend to inevitably overshare morbid thoughts. How about you?
Yeah, I've probably done that. I think I've gotten away with it a bit. Yeah, I did that a few weeks ago where I disappeared for a while and then I came back and I did a stream where I probably overshared a little, but yeah. Yeah, what about you? How are you managing with it? You share a lot less now, don't you? We know a
Yes.
lot less about your personal
Yes.
life now than we used to do. I mean, we used to see you driving around, doing videos at work and all kinds of stuff. You've stopped all that, haven't you?
Yes, I've become much more careful and conservative in my old age. I share less. I'm much less likely to stream when I'm feeling down. Also, getting medicated has moderated many of my emotions. So I would share particularly morbid thoughts when I was in that rejection sensitive dysphoria, when I was, cycling down into, a very dark place. And
Yeah.
I go down that place much less often these days. And if I'm ever approaching that place, I'm much less likely to share. So as my real life gets better, my online life becomes more guarded because I've got more to share. Like when my real life is thriving, right? I feel much better about the status quo. When my real life is crap, I'm quite happy to, challenge the status quo.
Yeah. It's part of ADHD is the cyclical nature of moods, though, I think, Luke. Have you kind
Actually,
of put the two and two together or not?
As I understand it, and I'm not an ADHD expert, I think that's actually the opposite. What distinguishes ADHD from
Really?
mood disorders is the situational aspect, incident aspect of ADHD. So, for example, bipolar and ADHD look very similar, but bipolar is cyclical mood swings, while ADHD is incident-provoked mood swings. So, for example, when I was at work and I didn't get any work email for 2 hours, that incident provoked me to spiral down. But then as soon as I started getting work email again, I was, completely out of that dysphoria.
Yeah. How about this, though? Rather than mood, that might have been like the wrong descriptor. What I'm talking about is I go through cycles, periods where like I have more symptoms than other times, and these periods seem to last maybe a month or certainly weeks, definitely days, where I can't find anything, I can't do anything right, I'm clumsy, I knock everything over, I'm late, all these symptoms cluster together, and then I go through periods where I'm sailing, I'm doing fine, I barely notice like the ADHD stuff, and then it comes back. Do you notice any of that?
Yeah. So 2 thoughts. One is that this might be stuff outside of ADHD. So when you have these mood cycles that last for weeks, as I understand it, that's outside of ADHD. Second, people with ADHD tend to be really poor at seeing themselves accurately. So there may very well be certain incidents that are provoking this dysphoria, and we're seeing it as a cyclical mood when really it may be the loss of some part of our life that was making our life function, and then we went down. So often we get borrowed functioning. So we form friendship with the community or with individuals who are much more functional than ourselves, and we borrow their functioning and lift ourselves up. And this is what consistently happened to me. And I think, now I'm finally living life right. Now I've finally mastered life. I'm now an adult and I'm thriving. But what's really going on is that I'm just borrowing functioning from the people around me, and that never lasts long.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can see some of that. Um, yeah, I definitely go through long periods though. I just can't do anything right. Nothing works. Nothing clicks, and then I get these periods where I'm in a flow state. Do you ever get that where you're in a
Oh, yeah.
flow state? And
Yeah.
yeah, and isn't it great?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I wish I could just ride that all the time, dude.
No,
Oh
that's
my
so
God.
true. The problem with like one bad thing happening is it always seems to be accompanied by other humiliations. So that they spiral.
Yes.
Like when there's a
Yeah.
financial setback, there will often be social setbacks associated with it, and then things start to spiral downward. And yeah, like bad news, humiliation, setbacks never seem to occur singularly.
Yeah, yeah. So how honestly is the medication then? How much on a scale of percent wise, like 5%, 10%, 50%, has it improved your life, do you really feel?
I would say it's improved my my work product 40-50%. I would say it's improved
Wow.
my life somewhere close to that 50%. So initially, I just went on the stimulant medication Adderall, which
Yes.
reduces my distractibility, but it doesn't affect the emotional turmoil that goes with ADHD. So over the past few weeks, I've added clonidine and Strattera, which affect the emotional. They're non-stimulant medications. They reduce the intensity of the emotions of ADHD, particularly the rejection-sensitive dysphoria. And I've now got some ADHD protection even when the Adderall isn't kicking in. So I've been able to reduce the Adderall, like reduce the stimulant medication to just once a day, 10 milligram tablet. And I've still got protection from these longer lasting non-stimulant medications. So they're helping me on blunting the dysphoria to which I'm particularly prone when I have setbacks. So I'm much more emotionally even and also less distractible. So I am really happy with the medication.
What are the others? Are the others SSRIs or something like
No,
antidepressants or
so
what?
they're not SSRIs, so clonidine and Strattera. So the medications that have been around a long time. I think clonidine initially started out primarily for use in lowering blood pressure, so it helps sleep. And I've been on it in the past. I remember I went to a psychiatrist in something like 2001, 2002, and I said, I've got all these problems with narcissistic personality disorder. And he says, I'm not so sure, just take some clonidine. It will take the edge off your emotional turbulence. And it did. And I was on clonidine for about 9 years. And then I thought it'd be a good idea to go off it. And then I became much more susceptible to the emotional turbulence. And then Strattera, again, it seems to take the edge off the emotional dysphoria.
Interesting. And what about you titrated up to the higher dose and you came back down, is that correct?
Yes. So I titrated up to the prescribed dose of Adderall that I received, which was 2 10 milligram tablets. Initially, I couldn't handle it because I was combining it with some caffeine. But if I don't take any caffeine, I found I could handle quite well the full prescribed dose of Adderall, which was 2 10 milligram tablets, which is still a relatively low level of Adderall. So I'd take one tablet about 6 or 7 a.m., and then the second tablet about 11 a.m., 12, and I would sleep just fine as long as I didn't have any caffeine. Now, I can have caffeine and 1 10 milligram tab of Adderall. That doesn't seem to damage me. But then when we added in the Strattera and the clonidine, I found I functioned just fine with just one. You're able to reduce stimulants when you add other and non-stimulant ADHD medication.
Yeah, don't you worry that you're taking too many drugs though now. I mean, it's quite a combination.
Well, if you use
if it's doing you good, I suppose.
Yeah, it's not like drugs are just some generic challenge to your system that always produce a certain amount of side effects. Certain drugs have huge side effects and tremendous dangers. Other drugs have minimal side effects and minimal dangers. If you take stimulant medication, as prescribed, there's very little harm in it. All right, you don't spiral into addiction. It keeps working for years and years and years. But if you abuse the medication, then there's harm. But the drugs Strattera and clonidine, again, they are the lowest level of medications, right? You can buy these, online. God forbid that anyone do this, but people can buy these medications online from places like rxshop.md. God forbid that people do this, because then they would not be sending money to pharmaceutical companies. God forbid people go to rxshop.md and buy these drugs for like $1 each instead of spending $20, $25 per pill at a pharmacy if they don't have medication. But the reason that you can get drugs like this through sites like rxshop.md is that they're at a very low level of government regulation. They're at the lowest level. Yeah. So stimulant medication is pretty much at the highest level because it's particularly susceptible to abuse. But almost nobody abuses non-stimulants like Strattera and clonidine. And so the drugs that I'm taking, there's just very little danger to them. Other drugs, there is danger. You take SSRIs, it shrinks the gray matter in your brain. Right? There are good reasons to be highly skeptical of many medications.
Yeah, I think it's doubtful they even work to much placebo effect in the SSRI literature, from my limited understanding. But what do I know?
I agree. I agree. But the placebo effect is a wonderful thing. Like if taking a drug gives you the placebo effect, that's usually adaptive for most people, as long as it lasts.
Yes, definitely. You know what? You do know, obviously, I disavow this, but what you mustn't do, Luke, is inform your prescriber that you need to titrate back up to the 20 milligrams and then just stick on your same dose and start saving the other 10 milligrams for a rainy day.
God forbid.
Definitely don't do that.
Definitely don't.
Don't do that.
Always do exactly what the people in authority tell you to do, because they know what's best better than you do.
Yeah. Don't titrate up.
No.
And don't save the extra pill for the days when you might have lost yours, or
right, you might have lost your insurance. Like I pay $150 a month for my ADHD prescription and medication, and like God forbid that I let that wane instead of sending $150 a month and just operate for 6 months on all the stored up saved Adderall and then renew it again 6 months later.
That would be unsafe.
That would be unsafe. Or God forbid people buy this medication from overseas pharmacies that have a long track record of safety and efficacy and expense, and don't follow the law and send the money to their local pharmacy. Like God forbid people buy this medication at 5% of the price overseas. They should be sending this money to pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, Big Pharma would go out of business, so we can't have that. This show is sponsored by Pfizer. Okay.
Yeah, spiritually, if not literally.
All right, on that note, I am going to go, Luke.
Blessings.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay,
right,
take
see
care,
you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right, Charles Murray here tweets an example of the young Tucker Carlson that has made me reluctant to go after today's Tucker.